Hi Wigston Academy students, I'm Manish Bhasin, a former pupil at what is now called the Academy, Wigston Academy, but was Guthlaxton College when I was there a fair while ago. So I'm thinking 23 years ago. I know I don't look it. For those of you that may not know what I do, so I'm a football broadcaster, sports journalist essentially. And it all started during my time at Guthlaxton, or hence now the Wigston Academy. Coming through the system there, I was going to say the ranks, talking like a footballer, but through the system, I remember essentially how the journey started out as a 14-year-old, which was kind of coinciding with me doing my GCSEs. Now, I'm not quite sure how many of you will be as young as 14 watching this, but if you're doing the same thing as I did back then, you get a week's work experience to go out in industry, whether it's to follow one of your parents in their law firm, or kind of being a secretary, a lawyer, a solicitor, dentist, whatever. You get the chance to don an oversized suit, try and look a lot older than you are, and just learn about what it's like to do a 9-to-5 job. Now, when I was back at Guthlaxton in good old Wigan, I essentially had just been introduced to somebody who was presenting radio shows at Radio Leicester, at Stroke the Asia Network. So there were two radio stations essentially in Epic House, which was a multi-storey building in Charles Street in town. And I asked that presenter and family friend to introduce me to the sports editor at Radio Leicester, because as a sports mad person, not only was I hell-bent on listening to every Leicester City match on Radio Leicester, listen to Leicester Tigers do their thing during the winter months predominantly, and then listen to Leicestershire cricket, because I loved all sports. And I was like many of you who'll be watching this, give you a ball, give you a bat or a racket, something, and you'll make up your own sport and just play it in the summer months until it gets dark and beyond. And that was me. And if I couldn't play any of those sports professionally, I just thought the next best thing for me to do is cover the sport from a distance, and that would be as a journalist, as a commentator. So from 14, I learnt to get my foot in the door at Radio Leicester, how to edit tape and edit interviews. So they used to be on tape about that big. They run from spool to spool, and you could take out words literally with a blade and a bit of sellotape and stick it together, and then you've changed the whole meaning of an interview. So the very essence of kind of editing, learning to type and write, as to how you speak, not how you read it in newspapers, because journalism is very different in terms of vocal to written. And just also working on delivery in terms of the speed, the urgency, the kind of where you put your stresses. And at 14, that's all I wanted to do. And I followed the guy at Radio Leicester for a week. I got to see the Leicester City training ground. I met the players, and then went to see the Leicester Tigers kind of equivalent, and I just thought, wow, I need this job, I want this job. So what I did was I essentially geared my life to getting that sport editor's job at Radio Leicester. And in a nutshell, 8 years later, 2 degrees later, I got it. I was quite focused on what I wanted to do. I was lucky that at 14 I had an idea of where I wanted to pursue as a career. And I know that that's very unusual. People, even in their mid to late 20s, won't really have an idea as to what they want to do long term. But I could never see myself doing an office job. I was pretty good at English. I love my sport, and I just thought if I could combine those two things, I thought I could make a living somewhere. So having done 2 university degrees, undergrad and postgrad, at Anglia Ruskin University as my undergrad, 3 years in communication studies and English lit, I wasted very little time and went straight to my postgrad degree, which was a postgrad diploma in broadcast journalism at Cardiff University, which had a great reputation at the time. They had people like Kate Adie, former BBC war correspondent, as one of the guest lecturers, and Hugh Edwards, who comes from just up the road in Llanelli from Cardiff, and of course, as you all know, presents the 9 o'clock news on BBC One on a nightly basis. So to have the backing of those guys, and then during my university years to carry on whichever city I was in, so Cambridge for my undergrad. I got my foot into the local radio station saying, this is what I do at Radio Leicester, so can I carry on doing stuff here? I kept my experience up. So by the time I did my postgrad diploma at Cardiff University, aged 21, I'd already had 8 years of experience of what it was like to be a trainee journalist, starting at the age of 14. And that was interesting because then at 21 and armed to the eyeballs with 2 degrees and 8 years of kind of self-taught experience, but also talking and being in radio stations, garnering experience, I freelanced at Radio Leicester. I put in lots and lots of free hours just covering Leicester City reserve games, looking for the next up-and-coming talent and leaving a vocal radio report for them to play on their breakfast programme on the sports bulletins. So that needed a bit of initiative because nobody was doing that at the time. And FNF is what it was called, Friday Night Football or Family Night Football, because they were gearing up all the Leicester City reserves for young members, the future supporters, to try and attend without the added hostility as for what would be on a normal match day for a first team game. And so that was it. Having done the degrees, I scoured the kind of freelance route. Worked at Radio Derby for a while, getting shifts in the diary. I still remember having a diary. You literally pen out where you're doing your shifts for the next 3 months, and they were just sporadic here or there. Fill it up with Radio Nottingham, Radio Leicester, Radio Sheffield, so around the same area. While at the same time going back home to live with mum and dad, which I have to say was not the easiest, having spent 4 years away from home doing essentially whatever you wanted and coming home in whatever state. But yeah, and that was interesting. I then had a job interview at Radio Leicester for a staff position, and I was so over the moon to get it. And I knew that was the first rung of the kind of the ladder to try and climb up. Without wanting to bore all of you guys, rigid, went from local radio, so I was at Radio Leicester. I went from starting off reading the sports bulletins to then presenting sports programs on Saturdays, then becoming commentator, then presenting drive time, which included local politics, and doing essentially most of the jobs available to a local radio presenter. And for someone who came from Leicester and knew what the city was all about, what the makeup of the population was about too, I just thought, this was my natural home, and it felt like it. I went from Radio Leicester for 5 years to then Central Television, reading sports news on the local ITV network from Nottingham, presenting Soccer Sunday, I think it was at the time, rounding up all the Football League goals from Birmingham, across the Midlands, so the West and the East Midlands. I then got a phone call to present Football Focus, as you guys all know, presented now by Alex Scott before Dan Walker was me, for 6 years. So that was quite a culture shock, going live across the country on the network of BBC One on a flagship sports programme that had been presented by icons before me, Gary Lineker, Des Lynam and Bob Wilson. And then went on to the Football League show late on a Saturday night. As many of you, possibly Football League fans, will know, following Gary Lineker, a former Leicester guy, was a really kind of eye-opening experience. Because covering Leagues 1 and 2 was always something that, as a Leicester fan, you weren't so familiar with, but it was all about research and preparation. And that's one of the key things I've come away from, even to this day, that I think is essential to doing this job well. And now, for the last 6 years, after the Football League show, I'm now one of the core presenters for the Premier League's overseas match coverage. So in the Premier League season, you've got 318 games or thereabouts that are beamed right across the world. And I present the 3 o'clocks on the Saturday, plus the early games and one of the midweek matches. And it goes out to what they've calculated here to be around 700 million viewers. So it's the whole of Africa, much of Asia, the Middle East, China, Maldives, and some rather exotic places like the Seychelles. And a bit of Europe, but not, of course, the UK, because here the Premier League coverage is given to you by Sky, BT, and on the odd occasion, Amazon Television. So that's what I'm doing at the minute. This is the studio here at Stockley Park, which is also the home of VAR, which is quite interesting. And occasionally I present for the BBC's FA Cup coverage. I did Match of the Day recently when Gary Lineker had COVID, which was a great experience on a Saturday, and I presented on Sunday as well. And from these studios here, I was hosting the CBS's UEFA Cup coverage, or Europa League coverage as it is now, and that was going straight out to the United States as part of their coverage of Europe's second competition. And yeah, so lots going on for me at the minute. It's a great industry to be in, but as is just as important in other industries, is getting that foot through the door. So these are the things that I'd say to you. One is, don't let anyone put you off from going into a field as competitive as this. People will say to you, oh, why would you want to do that? You've got YouTubers, you've got this, you've got that, you've got guys doing it already from their living room and they're already a household name. Why would you want to compete with them? Well, if you want it enough, at least that's a beginning. It's not enough, but it's a start, because you can have the best voice, the best appearance, the best knowledge, but you also need to take note or get the heads turned of some of the most important people around of the industry. So through LinkedIn, through the internet, through Instagram, Twitter, follow journalists, people that you admire, those people that you want to kind of emulate in a way. Try and ask if you can follow them, interview them, get from them what's got them to where they are. Fill that contacts book up with as many names as possible. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And eventually, I'd like to think, once you've made enough of yourself to those people, they might just say, one of them might just turn around and say, you know what, just come in, let's have a cup of tea, let's have a coffee, let's have a chat, see what you're all about. Because I've met enough people in the industry who've got the talent, but they just need that little step. And all I'd say is just try and get in locally with your paper, with your radio, your television. Say that, can you follow them around? I think now, post-COVID era, we're now able to be in touch face to face a lot more freer than, if I was doing this video 2 years ago, where the world was in a very different place. So all I can say is enjoy the Careers Week. Listen to what everyone's got to say. If this isn't for you, then I certainly wish you well in pursuing your other interests. But if sport English is something that you would love to pursue, then try that path. Look at the universities offering the best courses, and the best of luck. And who knows, I might see you on the road at some point in the future.